Good evening, everybody. Merry Christmas. It's the end of Christmas. This is Lorraine Alternative Homesteading. I hope everybody's doing well. It is still bitterly cold here in Kentucky, but it actually reached these high temperatures of 19 degrees today. It's actually supposed to be in the 60s next week. But I hope everybody had a good Christmas. This is another one of those little mini arts. It's a little kitty cat. I have my phone camera propped up on a little stand here because I'm going to read a fairly long document. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, and it's really interesting because when I mentioned what my background was, somebody commented that she felt that this could be one of the reasons why I'm targeted because of my research into ADHD. Now, you have to understand that this paper was written May 18, 2011, and it was the culmination of 2 years of research and the completion of my master's degree. Okay, so not only did it take 2 years to research this topic, but I had been researching the topic before I entered the graduate program in undergraduate school, and through interviewing and watching some of my daughter's friends. And I remember when I was going through my divorce, I decided to take my daughter to a psychiatrist. I just wanted to make sure that she was doing okay, everything was okay, and that there weren't any problems and stuff. So, I take her to the shrink, a couple of visits and stuff. And it was a female in Freehold, New Jersey. I won't go into detail. And I liked her, very much at first. And then I remember her pulling me aside and saying, I think your daughter might have ADHD. Maybe we should put her on some medication. I said, no, she doesn't have ADHD. And, I refused to medicate my daughter. And that was actually the last visit I ever had with her. For the record, just so that you folks know about my daughter, she's in her 30s now. She's always been what was considered to be an exceptional and academically talented child. She scored on the national tests 99.99 on the math scores. In math, she was like a math pro. And then I think she scored like 97 percentile for English or language or whatever it was. So she was always, top of her class. She was then in academically talented classes. She then tested, there was a program called the Medical Science Program in a Freehold high school. They only accepted like 35 kids, and more than 300 kids applied. And my daughter was accepted. She was one of the ones who was accepted. And then she was actually able to, in high school, take a college-level psychology class, of all things, and do well. And then she caught the attention of Johns Hopkins Center for Talented Youth. And she took all of their spatial tests and stuff, and she did quite well on those. And she was a college professor. And she also, it's very difficult to receive grants. I mean, although, these local police departments, they seem to be getting lots of them. But I'm talking about education grants to perform research. It's really difficult. And my daughter got 2 of the top grants that you can get, where she was able to, she not only traveled to China with her class, but she also traveled to Newfoundland on a grant So the fact that this psychiatrist wanted to label my daughter ADHD, she was quite young. Again, I was going through a divorce. I said absolutely no. But I wanted to say something really hilarious, I thought. Because I really don't want to make sure that my daughter was doing okay. So the psychiatrist usually interviewed with my daughter separately, and I would sit in the hallway. And then she'd talk to me afterwards. But this one time, she had my daughter sit there, and she turns to my daughter and she says, "Well, tell your mother what you told me about what really upsets you." So my daughter turns to me and she says, "You make me make my bed." And I'm thinking, okay, if that is the most horrible thing I've done to you in your lifetime, well, good. Because now I know that Jordan Peterson, the famous author, psychiatrist and stuff, in his book, 10 Rules for Life, he says to make your bed. And I'm so glad that I taught my daughter how to make her bed and how that was a priority in life. But during that time, psychiatrists were labeling a lot of children with ADHD. This is normal developmental behavior, folks. My daughter's generation, children that grew up in the 80s, were considered to be, they call them indigo children, right? They have a multi-faceted ability to multitask. Unlike people of my generation, where we're more individually focused on one thing, easily distracted by doing something else, these kids have a peripheral vision. So they can be doing one thing and be focused on one thing, but know everything that's going on in the background. But psychiatrists back in the day had no awareness of this. They still don't. And we're talking about, again, my research with my daughter's friends was years before I completed this capstone, this master's capstone thesis paper. I remember being really heartbroken to see some of my daughter's friends being medicated with antipsychotics, antidepressants. And sometimes I'd pull them aside and ask them, I said, well, how are you feeling? Tell me how you feel when you're on this drug. And I noticed that a couple of her female friends, and she had 2 sets of twin friends, so I thought it was really interesting. And one set of twin friends actually had a psychiatrist as a father, which really was disturbing to me. But I remember her becoming very hypersexual at a very young age. And that's one of the unfortunate negative side effects of medicating your children with methylphenidate, which is like drugging your kids with cocaine. But anyway, I'm going to start from the beginning here, folks, because this is a very controversial topic. And you all may or may not know that I cannot stand big pharma. I just can't. I just can't stand them. They're a big money-making, profit-making, turning people into addicts. So my topic was, in the Department of Psychology, Health, medicating ADHD children, the potential consequences and alternatives. The introduction is, there's a growing concern in the United States is the increased diagnosis of Attention-Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, ADHD, in children as young as 2 years old, and in prescribing controlled substances as a remedy. Behavior problems that may be few at home appear to be more prevalent within a classroom setting. There is an increased need to address the possible consequences of long-term Ritalin use and draw attention to alternatives that positively affect behaviors associated with ADHD. Additionally, some ADHD behaviors may be related to diet, lack of physical activity, and problems within the home rather than any inherent behavior disorder. Now, I want to add something, folks. If I were to do this research today, with what I know about electromagnetic fields, I would have added that into this paper. But I will tell you that I researched for 2 years and I found nothing relating electromagnetic fields to ADHD. Nothing. It would have been added in my paper. But I would add it now. So, and Wi-Fi wasn't the big prevalent thing back then. They were just starting to add it to the schools. The problem related to this issue is that research demonstrates that stimulant medication in the treatment of children diagnosed with ADHD has serious long-term emotional and health consequences. Some of these long-term consequences include the misuse, addiction, and dependency, infertility, social stigmas, poor or inhibited coping mechanisms, negative findings on growth in height, the progressive and increased development in personality disorders, social affect, and an increased rate of suicide. Ritalin is an illegal Schedule II substance under the Controlled Substances Act with a high potential for abuse, addiction, and self-medicated behaviors. Self-medicating behaviors are learned through societal and parental mirroring. Unfortunately, writing prescriptions appears to become a cultural norm. There are healthier alternatives that are easy, cost-effective, and fun for children and parents to integrate into their lives. Providing alternatives to amphetamine therapy is important and significant for many reasons. Currently, the United States consumes 80% of the world's methylphenidate, known as Ritalin, and outranks every other country in the world. Prescriptions for methylphenidate for individuals diagnosed with ADHD in the United States has increased more than 500% since 1990. In addition to potentially devastating long-term effects of Ritalin, many individuals who abuse prescription amphetamines commit insurance fraud to finance the purchase, while others sell their prescriptions for financial gain. The impact on society is profound and places a tremendous financial burden on individuals in public health care. And I know for a fact, and my daughter would tell me, that in university, some of her friends were selling Ritalin, their prescribed Ritalin, to pay off their student loans. Is that amazing, folks? At this time, investigation into this apparent generational problem is minimal, yet an emerging concern. Most of these children are too young to speak for themselves or to exhibit the potential long-term consequences suggested here. Others may not correlate their current emerging health problems and or addictions to amphetamines prescribed during childhood. Studying the effects of an ADHD diagnosis and subsequent drugging of young children is important for their future physical, mental, and emotional health. There is an additional need to research potential consequences of labeling children with a psychiatric disorder they may not have, or worse, in prescribing highly addictive controlled substances with the potential for abuse and long-term health risks. Finally, according to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, which is the DSM, there is a confirming evidence that behaviors associated with ADHD, which typically occur within the classroom setting, lessen or disappear when the child receives individual attention and or positive feedback. And these same behaviors also decrease with age. If ADHD behaviors improve with individual attention and positive feedback, then medication is not necessary. If hyperactivity and impulsivity symptoms gradually decrease across childhood into adolescence, as Malone, Vanek, Flory, and Lamis 2010 demonstrated, then offering a holistic approach instead of prescription medication appears to be a valid alternative. Perhaps the current diagnostic criteria is too broad, narrow, or contextual, given the possible long-term consequences of amphetamine therapy. It makes sense to try, or at the very least be aware, that healthy, non-pharmaceutical alternatives exist and are available. Lavoie 2008 discusses methods which a child can reach his or her full potential with proper diet, exercise, sleep, meditation, and mindfulness. These alternatives will be explored in greater detail. So now my problem statement is this. Children as young as 2 years old are being prescribed methylphenidate, more commonly known as Ritalin, when they are diagnosed with Attention-Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, ADHD, and research demonstrates that stimulant medication in the treatment of children diagnosed with ADHD may have serious long-term emotional and health consequences. Some of these long-term consequences include misuse, addiction, and dependency, infertility, social stigmas, poor or inhibited coping mechanisms, negative findings in growth and height, the progressive and increased development in personality disorders, social affect, and an increased rate of suicide. And I want to add cancer. Long-term use causes cancer. The possibility of Ritalin as a gateway to addiction and abnormal personality disorders are factors that affect various groups of children of all ages. Amphetamine therapy may potentially lead to severe psychological and physical dependence and health risks, including suicide. Diagnosis of ADHD is increasing rapidly, and there is no consistent agreement on what causes ADHD or even if it is a legitimate disorder. And back then, if I knew what I know now, I would say it is not a legitimate disorder. It is contrived. It was created. Child developmental research demonstrates that behaviors associated with ADHD gradually decrease over the span of childhood. So if hyperactivity and impulsivity symptoms gradually decrease across childhood into adolescence, as Malone et al. Demonstrated, then offering healthy alternatives to prescription medication may be preferred, especially in young populations. While there is a significant amount of emergent research and literature validating the effectiveness of proper diet, exercise, sleep, meditation, and mindfulness, these healthy alternative treatment methods are rarely discussed and are offered to parents as a first choice treatment for their child. There exists a moral and ethical responsibility to inform parents and children of possible long-term health risks. Ritalin therapy may create a society of children dependent on pharmaceutical drugs over their lifespan. The effects of Ritalin may be compared to cocaine. Ritalin and cocaine possess a high potential for addiction and negative withdrawal symptoms. Self-medicating behaviors are learned through societal and parental mirroring. There continues to be a high prevalence for writing prescriptions for children as young as 2. However, healthier, cost-effective alternatives also exist and are rarely offered. These factors may influence the future of children, our country, and how our country is viewed in our global society. There appears to be a gap in research demonstrating any consistent agreement on what causes ADHD, or if it even should be classified as a mental health disorder or merely a temperament trait. There is a growing body of evidence linking processed foods, food dyes, and chemical additives prevalent in our Western diet to behavior and central nervous system disorders associated with food allergies. If diet and food directly correlate to behavior problems, particularly in a more sensitive child, it makes sense to assess the reason and cause of that behavior. Risk factors are not being appropriately addressed, and there is a conflicting evidence to support the use of pharmaceutical intervention. A medical doctor or physician may be biased towards pharmaceutical rather than alternative interventions. Although an increase in ADHD behaviors have been demonstrated in diverse groups of children, these behaviors may be better explained with personality theory. Since many personality and temperament traits are subjective and influenced by culture, there is disagreement in research on what constitutes a genuine disorder or merely a characteristic of temperament. This theory warrants further study merit since personality is still developing, especially in young children. However, research has demonstrated that ADHD behaviors do decrease over childhood. And this is validating an important gap in literature regarding both the diagnosis and treatment of the disorder. The high evidence of ADHD diagnosis and subsequent prescribing of amphetamine therapy appears to be prevalent in westernized nations such as the United States. To date, the United States consumes 80% of the world's methylphenidate, Ritalin, and outranks every other country in the world. Behaviors categorized as abnormal in this country are considered developmentally appropriate in other countries, in other cultures. If we continue on the Ritalin trajectory, children may face a variety of long-term psychological, behavioral, and emotional problems, including addiction, carried over into adulthood, and even genetically passed on to their future offspring. As a global society, our treatment of children may influence the way our country is viewed by other countries across the globe. Are short-term benefits worth the possible long-term risks? Now, this is my integrated literature review. Stuart Washington, a neuroscientist, described a region of the brain called the default network. This complex network is involved in the development of introspection, social awareness, moral reasoning, empathy for others, and the ability to think of the future and future consequences of behavior. This region of the brain is activated when the mind is wandering or daydreaming rather than when it is focused. Since this unique network isn't fully developed until age 13, the use of Ritalin may interrupt brain development in this uniquely sensitive area. If children are prescribed Ritalin as young as 2 years old and continue pharmaceutical intervention throughout this critical stage of brain development, it appears likely that development of the functions associated with the default network may grow abnormally. As a result of more than 5 million children taking Ritalin, now I'm going to tell you folks, it was 5 million when I was performing my research. When I graduated, it was 8 million. 2 years later, it was 11 million children. As a result of more than 5 million children taking Ritalin for ADHD-like behaviors, it is likely their brain's default network may be significantly impaired by the interference of early stimulant medication. They don't want children to be creative. They don't want them to think out of the box. They don't want their minds to wander. They don't want them to think for themselves. I'm sorry, folks. I'm getting like tons of text messages here. There is a growing body of evidence to suggest that early drug use may significantly alter brain function and interfere with personality development. Folks, we're creating a society of narcissists. Social isolation, depression, lack of empathy, and an inability to demonstrate remorse are common characteristics of the antisocial personality, according to the APA. One of the defining diagnostic features of Attention-Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, ADHD, is inattention. Inattention pertains to the lack of sustained, close attention to details and not following through on tasks. In children before the age of 7, if a wandering mind activates the development of the default network, medicating the developing brain, especially in preschool children, may have severe consequences in the development of moral reasoning and empathy for others. The qualities of moral reasoning, empathy, social awareness, and future thinking behaviors are diagnostic features often lacking in personality disorders such as antisocial personality, borderline personality disorder, avoidant personality, and narcissistic personality disorders. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders has determined that a primary feature of antisocial personality disorder is the pervasive pattern and disregard for and violation of the rights of others beginning in childhood or early adolescence and continues into adulthood. However, diagnosing the anti-personality cannot be detected before the age of 18. If millions of preschool and preteen children are medicated with highly dangerous and addictive substances, the use of Ritalin, particularly before the age of 7 or 8, may inhibit or interfere with normal brain development and subsequently contribute to psychological, emotional, and health problems that may culminate in the diagnosis of a personality disorder. There is a deficiency of research correlating to the diagnosis of personality disorders with Ritalin use during childhood. There's also a lack of literature documenting the blatant omission of discounting these research findings. In many, if not all cases, a diagnosing practitioner may not inquire about past Ritalin use. The development of any of these personality disorders is also linked to an increased risk for depression, anti-personal relationship problems, addictive behaviors including drug and alcohol abuse, and dependency, gambling, bullying, criminal behaviors, chromosome damage, cancer. Methylphenidate, Ritalin, amphetamines, and psychotropic drugs are being prescribed to millions of children at alarming rates. However, early Ritalin use and its long-term consequences is a potential area where new knowledge may be needed. Are these potent medications necessary? Would a cup of caffeinated coffee offer similar stimulant benefits without the potentially harmful effects of Ritalin? Are we not also violating the rights of children too young to refuse medication or possess an awareness of the multitude of possible long-term consequences? When alternatives exist, these ethical, moral, and social questions beg further research. There's a critical need for additional longitudinal studies to determine possible neurological and subsequent personality changes. The question Was your child taking Ritalin during the time when? Also warrants further research. Every doctor treating a child needs to ask that question when diagnosing a child. Did your daughter, did your son, were they ever prescribed Ritalin? At what age? What prescription? How long? And when I say Ritalin, I read Ritalin, Adderall, Concerta. There has been a growing body of research on the diagnosis and pharmaceutical treatment of behaviors associated with ADHD, particularly in school children. The word Ritalin appears to be automatically associated with a child who misbehaves in the classroom. A significant amount of controversy exists in what is considered developmentally normal behavior compared to children diagnosed with ADHD. The diagnostic criteria is the first problem. Inattention is the defining diagnostic characteristic of ADHD, set forth by the American Psychological Association. Inattention is the inability to follow through and attend to tasks that require sustained attention to detail. However, many of these behavior-specific tasks exist in the context of the classroom culture. The prevalence of disruptive behaviors diminish when children were not in a classroom setting. Also, it is common for many young children to display active, energetic behaviors. Diagnosis also has relied on subjective observations. Teachers that are paid to diagnose a child. Traditional psychiatry assumes there is a chemical imbalance in the brain that causes mental illness. However, there has not been any confirming evidence that such an imbalance exists in children diagnosed with ADHD. And this still continues today, folks. There is still no confirming evidence that any imbalance exists. Alternately, an emerging body of research has positively confirmed that age of the individual and dose of stimulant treatment was later related to the development of antisocial personality disorder. An earlier study conducted by Northrop, Galley, Edwards, and Fountain in 2001 found a significant negative correlation between methylphenidate Ritalin dosage and idiosyncratic behavior, learning problems, dysphoria, and social withdrawal. These particular negative behavior traits are common characteristics of antisocial personality disorder. Diagnosis of ADHD is growing rapidly, and there's no consistent agreement on what causes ADHD or even if it is a legitimate disorder. Child development research demonstrates that behaviors associated with ADHD generally decrease over the span of the childhood. If behaviors associated with ADHD progressively decrease across childhood into adolescence, as Malone et al. Suggests, then the use of stimulant medication may be an overreaction to the problem. A second issue relates to the impact of amphetamines on the developing brain. Leo, in 2005, consolidates research findings on the harm caused by Ritalin in the developing young rat brain. Pharmaceutical experiments on healthy rats have demonstrated reliable and consistent results that Ritalin causes harmful long-term problems, including chemical imbalances in the brain. Researchers generally correlate results in the lab to its effect on humans. If Ritalin used on healthy rats cause long-term health problems, then it makes sense that long-term use of Ritalin may also place children at risk for later problems. Logically, if Ritalin is effective only on children diagnosed with ADHD, then why is the attention span of normal children also enhanced? Additionally, if all normal rats treated with Ritalin developed ADHD behaviors, perhaps Ritalin is the cause, not the cure, of those behaviors. A third possible problem exists. Malone, Van Eck, Flora, and Lamis linked ADHD to the onset of addiction in adolescence. And folks, I studied addiction. However, much research correlating ADHD to later addiction and subsequent suicide was conducted on a majority of children who already had a history of amphetamine therapy. Additionally, research has already demonstrated that early use of amphetamines may severely alter the brain. Addiction research also confirms that the brain is primed to want a drug with repeated use. The availability of Ritalin on the street, college campuses, and in one's medicine cabinet is also problematic. The possibility of Ritalin as a gateway to addiction and abnormal personality development are factors that affect various groups of children of all ages. Amphetamine therapy may potentially lead to severe psychological and physical dependence and health risks, including heart disease and suicide. Finally, based on these findings, new research questions emerge. Why aren't children paying attention in the classroom? Children have demonstrated little or no difficulty focusing intently on interesting video games and computer programs. If they are able to focus on a pleasurable task, then perhaps there needs to be or make other tasks more engaging and enjoyable. Perhaps the diagnostic criteria is too subjective or broad. Why are children acting out? Is it possible that harried parents and teachers prefer a sedated child? What if parents self-medicate? Perhaps there is a bias towards medicating their children. Right? If a parent uses drugs, let's drug the kids. When children receive individual attention, many behaviors associated with the diagnosis subsided or disappeared entirely. A case study by Widener in 1998 illustrated more ADHD diagnoses were made during winter months when there's less daylight and children were unable to play or exercise outside. And children today are growing up with technology in school and home and appear to be playing outside less as a result. An increase in physical activity may diminish behaviors associated with the diagnosis of ADHD. And while research finding in this area is generally backed by pharmaceutical companies, perhaps a bias exists to portray Ritalin as effective rather than demonstrate its adverse consequences, or that healthier, less costly alternatives are available. Many parents are becoming increasingly concerned about the possible long-term effects of medicating their children with Ritalin, and healthy alternatives such as mindfulness, Zen meditation, yoga, music, and Tai Chi appear to have positive results on ADHD behaviors. And my critical analysis narrative is there's been a growing body of evidence on the diagnostic criteria and pharmaceutical intervention of behaviors associated with ADHD, particularly in young children. However, an important gap in literature exists regarding long-term use of amphetamines by children, including negative health consequences and behavioral side effects. There is also a considerable amount of identifiable evidence contributing to this problem. Problems exist as a result of the current diagnostic criteria, an aggressive marketing business model, and in prescribing highly addictive amphetamine therapy to children as young as 1 year old. The potential causes. There are many contributing factors in the diagnosis and pharmaceutical treatment of children diagnosed with ADHD. First, parents of children whose behaviors are more intense, physically active, and curious contribute to the problem. Harried parents may have little patience for dealing with their child's excess energy and emotional needs. A child may act out in a classroom and require more attention when needs are not being met at home. As a result of strained family relationships, parents may seek the advice of a psychiatrist, physician, or school counselor. And if those individuals or organizations offer hope in the form of a pharmaceutical relief, they may be willing to try anything. Second, teachers and educational facilities are at fault for a number of reasons. A teacher may automatically recommend Ritalin to a parent whose child is disruptive rather than inquire about factors in the home that may be temporarily contributing to the disruptive behavior. In many instances, a school may not allow a child admission to class unless they're medicated. Working parents with fewer options may have little choice but to concede to school administration pressure. Additionally, Ritalin may be viewed as a neuro enhancer, and schools encourage prescriptions offering students an edge in test taking. However, the use of steroids, which is also a cognitive enhancer, is considered illegal in sports competitions. So there appears to be a double standard offering mixed messages. When a child is diagnosed with ADHD, they may be prescribed Ritalin, Concerta, or Adderall to enhance attention. However, the same drug used illicitly without a prescription is an amphetamine called speed. Speed, the effects of which are similar to cocaine. Ritalin may be a temporary fix with long-term consequences. A third cause involves the method of diagnosis. Psychiatric diagnostic classification codes were basically derived for Medicare billing reimbursement. When a diagnosis is made, it does not imply that it may be the cause of the behavior, only that certain observable behaviors exist. When a psychiatric diagnosis has been determined, a drug is often prescribed to treat that diagnosis. It is not known if that specific drug will work to alleviate symptoms or harm the individual. Reliance on feedback from children and parents add to the subjective determination on whether the drug does or does not work. It appears that effectiveness of any drug is hit or miss. Additionally, parents may feel there is something wrong with their child when he or she is diagnosed with an elusive chemical imbalance. However, to date, there has been no confirming evidence that an imbalance exists in children diagnosed with ADHD. Citing a chemical imbalance may be a marketing ploy to sell drugs because there is no form of measurement. There is no diagnostic test to demonstrate a chemical imbalance in children diagnosed with ADHD. And a fourth cause is the ADHD label. And according to Dr. Bregan, each time a psychiatrist label is added to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM, more disease is invented, more medication is formulated, then prescribed to treat the new disease or disorder. However, research results are often not shared with the general public, especially if the results are negative. This is problematic. The overdiagnosis and misdiagnosis of ADHD in the United States is a fifth cause. Currently, the United States prescribes more methylphenidate, Ritalin, than every other country in the world. More than 5 million children, back then, now it's more than 11 million, are medicated daily with some form of stimulant. Behaviors categorized as abnormal in this country are considered developmentally appropriate in other countries, and the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration correlates the overprescribing of drugs and its association with criminal intent. The National Institute on Drug Abuse in 2008 published a research report series on prescription drug abuse and addiction that includes drugs used to treat ADHD. And the University Department of Justice investigated, then published an 85-page synopsis of cases against doctors. Physicians between the ages of 30 and 80 were arrested and prosecuted in the unlawful distribution of pharmaceuticals directly to individuals via the internet. Many committed insurance fraud or illegally distributed controlled substances for profit. Illegal sales and marketing of prescription pharmaceuticals by trusted physicians is cause for concern. A sixth cause is diet and food processing. Young children demonstrate undesirable behaviors. Perhaps they are the result of eating fast foods high in sugar, food colorings, nitrates, hormones, and chemicals, improper diet, lack of exercise, coupled with divorce, blended families, lack of attention and boundaries, technology, or lack of sleep. Ironically, a progressive increase in ADHD diagnosis coincided with the introduction of synthetic food colorings approximately 30 years ago. I'm going to say that again, synthetic food colorings. Isn't that ironic? The effects. First, several health consequences and side effects of Ritalin have been reported. Sudden death has been reported in children who may have had heart abnormalities. However, no tests have determined if stimulant medication was the cause of the abnormality or if the defect existed prior to medication. If a heart abnormality was discovered prior to prescribing Ritalin, for instance, the administering physician should not have prescribed amphetamine therapy. The lack of assessment and historical questioning give rise to a second problem. Rather than terminate the first drug, a combination of drugs is often prescribed on a trial and error basis when possible long-term consequences are virtually ignored. Subsequent drug interactions make it nearly impossible to differentiate cause and effect between the first drug and each subsequent prescription. Physicians are prescribing drugs without prior evaluations, accurate assessments, and testing. A third consequence concerns documented reactions to amphetamines. There have been at least 1,459 reported cases of adverse Ritalin and concerted reactions in children between the ages of 1 to 14, reported to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, and that number increases to 1,940 through the age of 21 and further increases to 2,282 through the age of 43. Only 1 to 10% of the side effects, including death, are reported to the FDA, creating both another cause and a fourth effect. If more cases are reported and documented, perhaps more research would be conducted. At the very least, parents and physicians could be offered specific guidelines before choosing amphetamine therapy. A framework of alternative therapies could be offered instead. A fifth consequence is the often severe physical side effects of amphetamines. Many of those consequences include vomiting, fatigue, abnormal and antisocial behavior, urinary incontinence, suicide ideation, hallucinations, muscle weakness, color blindness, dizziness, loss of consciousness, convulsions, memory impairment, crying, hypothyroidism, tremors and tics. renal disorder, aggression, may not be associated even with the original amphetamine therapy in childhood. These behaviors and conditions are expressed in smart children with no history of violence, extreme behaviors, or ill health. Further longitudinal studies are needed. A sixth effect involves brain development. There is an emerging body of evidence demonstrating the negative effects of amphetamine therapy on the child's developing brain. The drug use can affect some very important pathways in processing amino acids and producing certain neurotransmitters such as adrenaline, dopamine, and serotonin. This in and of itself may cause changes in mood and behavior. Research demonstrates that stimulant medication in the treatment of children diagnosed with ADHD may have serious long-term emotional and health consequences, and some of these consequences include an increase in negative behaviors, aggression, agitation, weight loss, addiction, dependency, and withdrawal were expressed in formerly happy children. Infertility, social stigmas, poor and uninhibited coping mechanisms, and stunted growth in height were reported. Personality disorders, negative social effect, depression, and an increased rate of suicide reportedly increased. The possibility of Ritalin as a gateway to addiction and abnormal personality development are factors that affect various groups of children of all ages. And amphetamine therapy may potentially lead to severe psychological and physical dependence and health risks, including heart failure and suicide. A seventh effect of this problem is an increase in emerging violent tendencies in children treated with stimulants who have had no prior history of aggression, suicide tendencies, or manic symptoms. And this suggests that doctors who prescribe Ritalin to young children are, quote, creating a generation of violent juvenile offenders, unquote. An eighth reported effect is an increase in suicide ideation. Children treated with stimulants are 12 times more likely to attempt suicide. Stimulant medication increases the possibility of insomnia and sleep disturbances, agitation, tics, and mania. In some instances, the lack of sleep contributes to feeling of panic, anxiety, and depression, and children may experience a plethora of negative side effects from stimulant prescriptions. Some of those side effects may be diagnosed by a physician or psychiatrist as an emerging new behavior to be medicated with a new drug. Rather than attribute these newly emergent behaviors as negative side effects of early exposure to Ritalin, children are prescribed powerful pharmaceutical cocktails, the consequent combination of which is unknown. This may be a violation of human rights. And there is a gap in literature regarding long-term consequences of Ritalin and other amphetamine therapies on child development into adulthood. That many later emergent symptoms, disease, and illnesses that are not associated with the earlier pharmaceutical intervention is cause for concern. And Goldston suggests that a psychiatric label places individuals at a risk for additional diagnoses. Labeling a child with a psychiatric disorder or ADHD may increase the risk of depression leading to suicide. Misdiagnosis may be prevented with required, consistent, accurate diagnostic assessments. The resolution of these problems involve many recommendations already provided herein. Since the diagnosis of ADHD is based upon subjective observations, evaluation requires accurate diagnostic tools and revised diagnostic criteria, taking into account the emotional, psychological, and physical stages of child development. Ethical issues surrounding the involuntary drugging of children is a topic causing much debate. There remains an ethical dilemma in treating young children with a highly addictive substance over which they have no choice. Furthermore, amphetamines may be a gateway to an increase in substance abuse, including the use of illegal drugs, tobacco, and alcohol, in addition to prescription drugs possibly affecting a child for life. And there is a growing body of literature recommending alternatives to pharmaceutical intervention. These non-drug alternatives may be offered first. Alternative coping and stress reduction models, such as meditation, could easily be offered and incorporated in many school programs. These alternatives offer viable, healthy, cost-effective learning and coping strategies that may also be incorporated over the lifespan. The positive effects of mindfulness, meditation, and guided imagery on breathing, pulse rate, and hyperactivity have been demonstrated, and yoga could be incorporated into physical education school programs. Instead of eliminating music and art programs, schools could offer them as creative outlets and also reduce anxiety and stress. Soothing music could be played during lunchtime, and healthy foods could be discussed during family education class and incorporated into the school lunch program. The fact that Ritalin is a highly addictive suggests that more research is needed. The results of studies must be clearly documented and advertised as aggressively as the marketing does to promote these pharmaceutical drugs. Armed with truthful information, each individual involved can decide, based upon a true, informed consent. How children are cared for today now will greatly impact positively or negatively mankind for all future generations. The causes and effects presented here may be prevented with knowledge and information. If the information set forth here is presented to each parent, educator, and physician before medicating a child, there is a high probability that alternative treatments may be pursued first. A primary issue leading to the problem is twofold: the diagnosis of developmentally appropriate behavior in highly creative children as a psychiatric illness has led to the problem. Excessive Ritalin and ADHD marketing has planted subliminal seeds in our collective quick fix society, associating fidgety in children with a disorder and a drug to fix it. Problem resolution. The updated DSM-5 will address a change in the diagnostic and assessment process for ADHD. It appears that the upcoming, newly revised diagnostic criteria encourage an increase in the diagnosis of ADHD. Of course, as a result of the new changes to the diagnostic criteria, the primary resolution in diagnosing ADHD is in offering alternative solutions to amphetamine medication. The goal in developing a solution to medicating children diagnosed with ADHD is to demonstrate variable, healthy alternatives which may be easily incorporated into school and home routines. Resolving the issue of prescribing amphetamine therapy to children and offering alternatives would be the first step in addressing a treatment program for the disorder. And I want to add, folks, and this was after I wrote this paper, It might be in another paper. Children medicated with Ritalin became hypersexual at younger and younger ages. This is why you read about children raping children. And every instance, when I found out that that child had been drugged with Ritalin, they were the ones that were involved in date rape or raping of children, exploring, etc., etc. Those were the children. They were medicated with Ritalin. A review of current research by Fodor and Hooker in 2008 suggests that mindfulness techniques work especially well with children. Mindfulness training offers the opportunity to enhance children's attention, focus, and improve memory, self-acceptance, self-management skills, and self-understanding. Lastly, Fodor and Hooker suggest incorporating mindfulness into school curriculum. Fisher 2006 confirms that meditation is a proven means for stilling the mind, encouraging mindfulness, and providing optimal conditions for generative thinking and reflection. Lavoie suggests that children may reach their full potential with proper nutrition, exercise, sleep, meditation, and mindfulness. Adolescents report improved sleep quality, reduction of anxiety, and an increase in self-esteem, a decrease in stress, obsessive symptoms, and interpersonal problems. Mindfulness also teaches adolescents to distinguish between objective and subjective experiences, thereby decreasing negative behaviors. While the current DSM states that ADHD behaviors decrease or disappear entirely as the child ages, this important fact is not emphasized or repeated enough. If behaviors decrease over time, this fact validates an argument against prescribing drugs to young children. Since behavior and personality traits develop over time in developmental stages, it is both realistic and necessary to adapt alternate standards when treating young children for this alleged disorder. A challenge to incorporating alternatives may be that there is a financial incentive for medicating children as young as possible. If a child begins medication at 2 years old, there is essentially no way to prove or disprove that behavior would be any different since the child is growing up under the influence of drugs. There is no before and after method of comparison, and therefore drugging young children is a unique financial market in which to create addiction, since the body and brain are primed to desire a drug over time. The fact that amphetamines are usually prescribed first has resulted in placing barriers between the option of healthy alternatives, that many health insurance plans do not cover alternative treatments, serves to reinforce this barrier. Another obstacle is the unique market niche. It's a financial gold mine, and prescribing physicians may not readily relinquish reign. There may be an eventual need for the federal and state intervention mandating that alternative treatments are offered first before prescribing potentially addictive methylphenidate. These are my conclusions. The diagnosis of ADHD poses a challenge for the medical and psychological community. There currently is no assessment to accurately diagnose ADHD, and behaviors associated with ADHD diagnoses are also known to change and or diminish over time. Given the validity of current research on amphetamine use and abuse, including the Drug Enforcement Agency's statement that Ritalin should not be prescribed to children 6 years and under, it makes sense to consider alternatives, particularly in young children, and to address these concerns. It is hoped that the medical and psychological community aspire to embrace alternatives and continue to conduct research on the effects of amphetamines on young populations. In this process of resolving the ADHD diagnosis debate, offering alternatives to Ritalin may improve the health and welfare of children, while offering additional treatment tools to support physicians and educators and parents. Now, the next couple of paragraphs is actually to the professor. The requirement was to tell the professor what I thought about my research. I won't repeat that, but these are the list of references. So I've got page 1, page 2, page 3, 4, five, and page 6. And for the record, folks, I read every one of those peer-reviewed articles. I read every one of these from beginning to end, sometimes many times. And my paper just totally disappeared. Isn't that amazing? But folks, this is a Lorraine Alternative Homesteading. I hope you enjoyed that presentation. Okay, there it goes. I hope everybody had a wonderful Christmas. And I'm going to sign off for now because this is quite long, and I do believe that my memory storage in my phone will be crapping out any minute. So I'm going to post this online. Please share this with anyone you know who has a child diagnosed with ADHD, who is taking Ritalin. Anybody who wants some of these peer-reviewed articles to research them, just let me know. I can cut and paste some of them down below. Of course, there are too many of them here to post them all. But I hope you enjoyed this presentation. This was 2 years of research, folks. And I have to say, you know, a lot of people say, oh, well, university, getting your master's degree, your doctorate, it's all garbage. It's all this, it's all that. And yes, there is a lot of indoctrination done. But I tell you that in those 2 years, I learned so much. In critical thinking skills, in reading peer-reviewed articles, in reading what doctors wrote about, whether I agreed or disagreed. I was able to think for myself. And as you can see from my research, it differs from the norm. I am a free thinker, and I believe in health. Health patterns, not disease patterns. And Big Pharma really should be in prison. But of course, they are who they are. They're going to continue prescribing harmful drugs to you and me and children. But I do believe that this research was very important. I'm not the only one that has done it, but when I was in school at the time, I was the only person that I'm aware of, at least that's what my professor told me, who was writing about it. So I'm going to post this online now. Please like, comment, and share. Questions and comments down below, I welcome. I hope everybody had a wonderful Christmas. Welcome to the newcomers. And I look forward to the next video. Signing off for now.